Right, so thank you. That this talk will be a bit of an outlier for this meeting. It's a talk about education, not about the science per se. So I hope if you are still here, you're interested in education. So I'll tell you a bit about that. So this is a talk about how do you assess a degree program. And to explain what I'm talking about here, I need to give a bit of a background on the ISCB competencies framework, which is a framework we're using for many tasks in trying to understand what it means to teach in bioinformatics. And to give a bit of background on this, I have to point out that this is work of many people over many years who have been trying to develop a set of standards for saying what it means to teach well in bioinformatics or computational biology. This started from what was known as the Curriculum Task Force of the ISCB Education Committee, which was originally just 3 of us working more than a decade ago at this point, with what we now realize was a very naive view that we were going to go out, figure out what people are doing in teaching computational biology, and be able to say to the field, this is what the field agrees is good teaching in computational biology. This is what we agree as a field people should be teaching if you want to know how to work in this area. So that was how we started out here. We did a variety of surveys. What are people teaching in different programs? What do people employing people in our field want people to know? Came up with, this is an example of a controlled vocabulary. What are different people teaching? And we thought we would ask the question, what's the consensus? So we can come up with some recommendations for everyone else who wants to teach in the area. And the short summary of all of this is there was absolutely no consensus. There's nothing that even a simple majority of programs could agree should be taught to an aspiring computational biologist. So we went back to the drawing board. We brought in more people, a larger committee. Each of these is a paper that has come out over the years from a growing and continually growing group of people. And one of the big insights here coming from one of these new additions, Kath Brooksbank, was that we should bring in the notion of competencies. So competencies is basically the idea of looking at a higher level of abstraction than topics we might teach in a class. So these are examples of some of the first competencies that give us a way of thinking less specifically than particular classes or topics of classes. She also introduced the idea of personas, that part of the reason we can't get a consensus is because we're training for many different purposes. We're not all teaching people to work in this field for the same kind of job. You need a different kind of training if you're a wet lab biologist using bioinformatics versus if you are a software developer developing bioinformatics tools. So this led to the first ISCB competencies framework. Work on this continued through many iterations of working groups, meetings about this, GLBIO, ISMB, and many other conferences. We ran sessions to try to work with many of the members of the community who are interested in this, and there were a lot of people interested in developing this to try to come up with better ideas of what these competencies and personas should be. Came up with an improved version. This is what's called Bloom's taxonomy, a way of understanding different levels of mastery, which we realized was important in understanding how these programs work. You can't just say you need a certain competency, you need to understand to what degree of mastery do you need it. We met with many other groups who came together who are using competencies in different ways to tell us how are they using them, what are they learning from them. Came up with a more refined version of competencies, bringing in what are called KSAs, so knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So going now from this higher level of abstraction to more specific kinds of things and working on those 2 different levels. And this is an ongoing set of work that is now happening to a large degree at what are called the Bioinformatics Education Summits, so annual meetings of people interested in education in this field. For anyone who's interested, the next Global Bioinformatics Education Summit is actually next week in Mexico City, but they're all hybrid meetings, so I think that it's still possible to join as a virtual attendee if you want to be a part of this. But the end result of all of this is that We now have a version 3 set of the competencies. This is just showing what these are. They're fairly high-level kinds of ideas, but getting into much more detail through these KSAs. So these are KSAs for competency A, for example, as well as a much expanded notion of different career personas, different groups of people who need training in this area and might have different need for competencies or need them at different levels of mastery. And what all of that was doing was through contributions of many people over many years, finally get us to a point where we could get back to our original question and feel we can actually say something useful to people who want to develop training programs in this area. So we started working on how we would do this. What advice can we give? What can you use these competencies for? And one of the things you can use them for is to assess a program. You can do lots of other things. You can use them to help you design a program, to figure out how to modify a program. But one of the big things is assess a program, to take a program you have developed or trying to develop and say, in terms of our competencies, does this program seem to do a good job with respect to what you're trying to do, with respect to the population you're trying to teach? Does it match the standards of the field now that we feel we have some grasp on what those are? So to use this, we can kind of think of the competencies as a framework for mapping between different components of a program. So a program would typically have learning objectives. So again, a kind of high-level statement. What are you trying to impart with a particular training program? So this would be an example to be able to apply foundational mathematics and statistics needed for applied bioinformatics. That would be a potential learning objective of a training program. And then we can say, in terms of the competencies, how do these objectives match to competencies? So maybe that objective 1 requires a fairly high level of mastery of competencies B and D here, represented by the blue and green colors, which are high levels in the Bloom taxonomy. Maybe this competency 2 here requires fairly limited levels of mastery of competencies A and H here, so lower levels such as knowledge or comprehension at fairly low levels. And we can then take that through the competency framework and go to a mapping to a degree program. So from those levels of competencies, map to a degree program and say, given the learning objectives you set out for your program, and the mapping through the competencies, does your degree program appear to provide those objectives? Can you show that the things you're covering in your program meet the same competencies your learning objectives should be meeting for you? And we can also carry that to personas. If you can say, what do you think your program is training people to do? Can you also describe that in terms of competencies, map that through this framework, and show that those match to one another? And that's basically the fundamentals of using a competency framework to assess a program. In terms of the competencies, do the different elements of the program, objectives, experiences, and the personas you're trying to get to, the outputs of the program, align to one another. And that basically was the framework for how we proposed that we could finally get back to this original idea and start to say, for any given program, does this program meet what we think are now the standards of the bioinformatics education community? So we tried to formalize this through what we call the ISCB degree endorsement program. So this is a program where anyone who has a degree that they're trying to offer in this field can submit an application. The idea was that experts from our community can evaluate this in terms of an application describing this mapping through the competencies. It's not saying that this is what a computational biology program should be, but it's saying in terms of what you think your program is supposed to do and who it's supposed to serve, does it make sense in terms of the competency mapping? We set up an application web form for this. So if Seth is here, thanks for all the hard effort on this. We went through more iterations of trying to work with the community and streamline this because people immediately told us this is too hard to use. We're not going to submit applications. We kind of went back to the drawing board again. We now have a very detailed Word application form. So you can go to our website, download this. It walks you through all the steps of doing your own self-assessment in terms of competencies. And we set up a process modeled on essentially a journal review system for how we could go through these evaluations. So you could submit an application, we could do some pre-screening, farm this out to reviewers, so people who in theory are experts in bioinformatics education, have them walk through your self-assessment, see if they have feedback, hopefully give you some useful feedback on this. Just as with a journal review, possibly reject your application, possibly accept it, but more often ask for revisions. So say these are areas we think it can be improved, send that back to you, hopefully get back a set of revisions, and eventually get to a final stage of due diligence by ISCB and endorsement. So ISCB saying, we think in terms of what we understand about how to teach in this field, this is a good program we are happy with endorsing. So what do you get out of that? You get a certificate of endorsement from ISCB. That this is, as far as I know, just an electronic certificate. So I think we can print this on a piece of paper if you would like that. You get advertisement on the ISCB website, a newsletter, and in ISCB conferences. So this is something that we hope will be of interest to people who think they've got a good program and would like others to learn about it, and permission to use the ISCB logo and advertising your program to say this is an ISCB endorsed program. This is still fairly early stages, even though we've been working at this for a long time. It took a lot of effort to kind of streamline the process enough that we could start getting a community aware of this, submitting programs. We have our first program approved. So there is right now one ISCB endorsed program from Universiteit van Amsterdam. So their master's program. So congratulations to them. And here is their program advertised. This is a great ISCB endorsed program if anyone is looking for a master's degree. We are continuing to solicit applications. So there is a website here. If you have a program you think you might be interested in having endorsed, we would be interested in hearing about that. We have others in various stages of review and revision. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about this, or talk to anyone about this, is we desperately need reviewers. So if any of you are interested in bioinformatics education, if you have experience in designing or evaluating programs, we are starting to get in applications at a fairly rapid clip. We need people who can review these, and we'd be happy to work with you to educate people in how to do these kinds of reviews. But if any of you are interested in either having a program endorsed or reviewing for us, please feel free to get in touch with me or with others in our community. And this is really quite a big community at this point. So I just want to close with some acknowledgements. It's really impossible for me to acknowledge everyone because there were many, many workshops we ran of different people showing up, giving their opinions on what should the competencies be, what should the personas be, how do you map them to one another. This is a list of names I have. I unfortunately don't have any record of everyone who showed up at every workshop. So if you were one of those people, my apologies for leaving you off. Is the work of many different groups as well who have participated in these different meetings. So I thank all of them, and thanks to all of you for your attention.
Hi, thank you so much for such an informative talk. So I don't know if this is something you've gotten a chance to think about, but I do mentor people transitioning into bioinformatics. And I see how this can be a template that could scale even wider than institutional pieces. I think if this could be available as an app for personal development, personal use. So say, for instance, someone is coming from another field, they can easily just put in all their experience or what they have going on right now, and then immediately they get mapped to a certain degree or expertise within the bioinformatics. And this also helps because they not only rely on like school, they can also use that to take down that route in like YouTube videos or other extra outside of school, like extra resources. Because in my experience, I realized that, your lecturers can only do so much. There's so much you have to learn on your own. There's so much research you have to do on your own. So I guess my question is, what are the possible direction with regards to that? And do you see this as something that could really scale? Thank you.
Yes, so it's a great question. And there are some tools online, not an app that I know of. So this competency framework is now hosted by the European Bioinformatics Institute in the UK, so EBI. I'm not sure if I had the website anywhere here, but yeah, I guess maybe not. Oh yeah, here. So you can go to their website and read about the competencies. It's not quite the app you're describing, but you can look up the competencies, the KSAs associated with them, map your own skills to the different personas. They have a library of these personas. So that's not quite what you're asking for, but I think this mechanism could be adapted to cover more self-driven learning, to cover learning from resources online. It doesn't have to be a formal degree program. So we're running this for degree programs, but I think there's a lot more that can be done for it. I will say the bioinformatics education community is very volunteer driven. It's unfortunately very hard to get grants to do any of this work. So we depend on people who are passionate about it, who want to work on developing these things. So I think it's a great direction. We might need to find people, maybe you, who are interested in working with us on it.
Hi, a couple of questions on sort of the practicalities of this. Is there like a renewal timeline for this, like 5 years and you have to resubmit or something like that?
Yeah, so we did say 5 years. So if you are approved, you're approved for 5 years. I mean, it's young enough. We haven't had this come up yet. My hope would be it's a very streamlined review unless something substantial has changed. But yeah, so it's approval for 5 years.
And is it a purely online process, or is there any kind of like review of in-class work or anything like that?
We put in as part of the due diligence, kind of holding out the possibility that there might be a non-online portion. Our hope is to avoid that, except if really necessary. So we do say we want to verify that the site exists, the facilities you say are supporting it are quality facilities. We're hoping this doesn't involve site visits because we have no funds to do that. But hypothetically, that could be something that comes up, or if someone from our community is in your neighborhood, they might stop by and see what you have to offer.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wondering if you think the competencies will need to evolve over time very much, or do you feel like they're abstract enough that they can kind of stay the test of time for a while?
I think they will continue to need to evolve, hopefully less so. I mean, there's some things like, what do you need to know about prompt engineering? This was not on anyone's agenda a few years ago. Maybe this is a skill we all need now. Some new competencies about modern AI models might be needed. And personas keep changing as well. So there are different kinds of things needed there. I will say this will be one of the items on the agenda of next week's Bioinformatics Education Summit. Will there be a competencies version 4? And if so, what are the next steps to moving towards that? So I think there will be some evolution. I don't know if there will be another paper on the next style of competencies, or just transitioning to something that is maintainable kind of on its own going forward.